This podcast features adult content not suitable for listeners under the age of 18. You have been warned.
Hello and welcome to the very first Back to the Story Bonfire Fables. Basically what happened is that our beloved DM, along with a couple of our players, are unable to make it this week for recording, and playing a game of D&D. So instead of running a one-shot with like 4 people, 3 players and a DM, we decided to have a fireside, basically question and answer episode. So today we have Katie, who plays Melly in Back to the Story. We have Swan, who plays Vesper. We have Nyessa, who plays Ellery, and we have myself, Alexander, who plays Amson. So we have a number of questions that we have generated ourselves, as well as some questions that have been submitted from some friends of ours who also happen to listen to the podcast. And so we'll be going through a few of these questions. Some of them are going to be about ourselves as players, and some of them will also be about our characters. Nyessa, would you like to start us off?
So, our first question for the evening is, how did you get into tabletop RPGs? So, a kind of an additional question to start us off: who has been playing the longest?
All right, I guess I'll answer this one because I'm pretty sure I'm the person here who's been playing the longest. So I've been playing since I was 9 or 10, somewhere around there. And I got started by my dad, who played D&D when he was in high school. And he still had his old 2nd edition AD&D books. He had a DMG and the Monsters Compendium. In fact, it's just over there on my bottom shelf on the far end of the room. And my dad decided to get my brother and I into D&D because we were bored one day and didn't really have anything to do. And so I was a half-elf wizard, and my brother was a half-orc reskinned as a lizard man. And we played about an hour of the Ruins of Undermountain box set in 2nd edition, and that was fun. So that was my first game of tabletop RPGs, and I started a long time ago. So
my dad also played when he was younger, and so he would tell me about it and everything, and so I heard about it, and it always sounded like something I wanted to do. And I remember I got in high school the 4th edition red box. I never went anywhere with it because I could never get anyone to play with me. But I rolled up characters using the starter thing. I had a half elf who was raised by dwarves or something dumb like that. I still use the dice set from it. That's my Raven Queen dice set, actually. So I roll those for Vesper. But I didn't really get into playing for a long time. And then I started watching Titan's Grave, Ashes of Volcana, and I had really been wanting to play again. So I took that system, the Fantasy Age system, when it came out, and started DMing for some of my roommates. And from there, then Katie actually was like, "Hey, if you like Titan's Grave, you should watch Critical Role." And so I started watching Crit Role, and I was like, "Man, D&D sounds awesome." And I actually found a link in the chat when they used to have the Twitch chat going that said, "Hey, if you're looking for a party, check out Roll20." So I went to Roll20 and made an account there and was too intimidated to actually start looking for a group, until one night when Nyessa and I were watching it, and I was like, "Man, I just got to play." And this kind of actually goes into one of our other questions, but then I was like, I'm going to find a group. So I found this board that said for critters, by critters, or something like that. But it was basically like looking for critters. And I was like, cool, I guess I want to be a human druid. Why not? And I got a message back almost immediately from the DM, who was just some random dude named Klaus. And he was like, "Yeah, we need a druid. Come and play." And the rest is history. So this has been my first actual experience with D&D. Has been Klaus and Michael and Roger 2 years ago. So yeah.
I guess for me, it's kind of similar in certain ways. Though I never played tabletop games when I was younger, but I did play other kinds of role-playing games, either on the computer or the high school LARP club that I co-founded with a friend of mine. But I had this kind of weird aversion to Dungeons and Dragons for a while for reasons that we will not get into today. And it kept me away for a really long time until Swan introduced me to Critical Role, and I started watching that, and that kind of helped me get over some of my anxieties around the idea of playing a tabletop RPG. And my first tabletop RPG was actually this little game called Downfall, which is a 3-player one-shot game that I played with a couple of local friends. And then a little while after that, almost exactly a year ago, just a little bit over a year ago, I played my first game of D&D with those same 2 friends and with Swan. And the rest is history.
Is it my go? Okay. Got into D&D because I first started watching Titan's Grave as well. And then when that ran out, I needed something else. So I found Critical Role because of Laura Bailey. And then my university had a game society. At the end of the year, all the DMs stood up and pitched game. And then basically people could go and apply to see if they could play. And one guy, he built this entire system like by himself, and he wanted to play test it. And I signed up, and I didn't think I'd hear back or anything, but I did. So I played that. And then I actually got into D&D because Fina found me a game. I think it was, like 2 years ago.
About 2 years ago.
And I said, then you left. And then we didn't play for a bit together. And then you brought me into the game with the guys now.
Oh, yeah.
Which was fun. That was so great. And that's how I met this group.
Kind of goes into our next question then, hey?
Yeah.
Is that what the next question is? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Next question, how did you first get involved with this group of players?
Nyessa, you want to answer that one first?
Yeah, so my answer probably goes without saying from what I said before, but I was invited by Swan, and I was a little bit reluctant at first to play with a large group of people that I mostly don't know, but I decided to go ahead and try and be brave and jumped into it, and it's one of the best decisions I've made. Y'all are lovely.
Ditto.
Swan and Katie, you kind of answered that.
We kind of had ours, yeah. I started playing with, for my first D&D game, it was Klaus was DMing, and then Michael, Roger, 2 other guys who ended up leaving, and then one of Klaus's friends from real life who stuck with us for a while. But the other 2 guys we were playing with they didn't have the same play style we did, and it wasn't really working out. So Klaus messaged me and was like, hey, we're going to switch to this other game, and my friend who plays with us is going to DM it instead. Do you want to, and there's another guy who plays, and anyways, we switched over to a different game. And then in that game, I was like, this is really fun, and I want to play with Katie again. And so I went to the DM and I was like, can I bring Katie? And he's like, yeah, of course. And so I was like, Katie, and brought her into the fold. And that was such a fun game. Katie was the only good character. The rest of us were.
I was the only one against killing people. It was awful because the whole time they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll just kill this person." I was like, "Or
we can kidnap them."
I
Hold on a
suggested
second.
kidnapping a lot.
Yeah. What if we just kidnap them instead?
Yeah, it was fine. It was like,
Yeah.
kidnap them, release them later. Sorted. I was also the only healer, I think, as well, with the only person
Yeah.
with healing spells.
And you were a bard. So,
Oh boy.
I
So
would've
how?
gone- Mhm.
So how was your attempt to be the conscience of the group? How
Good.
successful was that?
Not great, man.
Oh, she was the best of us. You were also
Well, we
the only-
didn't.
you were also the only one
Michael's
who died at the
character
end.
killed- Pardon? Yeah, I also
Yeah.
the one that died.
It was so sad. She was the only one who didn't deserve it for any reason. Out of all of the player characters, any one of them could have died, and it's like, I mean, yeah, they were kind of a shitty person. She was the only one who didn't deserve it.
It really, like, they even tried rezzing me, like, twice, and it just was like, she is dead. This is not working, because the dice just, like, did not work in my
Yeah.
favor.
Yeah.
It was fun.
It's a good game.
So Alexander, that leaves you.
Yeah. So mine's a little bit different from everybody else's. I think I'm the only one in the group that didn't actually know anybody outside of the group beforehand. I was looking to replace my Saturday game that I had left due to basically I didn't really mesh with the group anymore. Kind of fell apart that way. So I was looking for a replacement for the Saturday game because I still really wanted to play. And I wanted to look for a group that had a lot of roleplay in it. And so I was looking on Roll20 because I had heard things about it, and I've been watching D&D on like Twitch and things like that for years now. And so I knew from the roleplay guys, you know, like JP and Adam Coble, those guys, that they played on Roll20. So I'm like, okay, cool, I'll try it out. So I made an account, and then I had it sitting there for months and months and months on end. I looked for a group, and I found a advertisement that Klaus had put out for a game. And he was basically just like, hey, so I'm going to be starting up a new group. We're just finishing up this game. We've got like a few sessions left, and then we're gonna hop into another game. I'll be DMing, blah blah blah. So I'm like, hey, I'm really into roleplay, and I want to do this kind of thing. And then I had actually made the concept for Amson at that point, and I'm like, hey, I really want to play a bard. And so he's just like, yeah, that sounds cool, awesome. So it was me and two other guys. I can't remember their names. It was like Simon and Niles or something like that. People that I've never met before. And I heard nothing from Klaus for like 3 months. It's like, I saw him prepping a few things every now and then, but like heard nothing from him. And then all of a sudden, he's just like, hey, we need another player. You want to join? And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And so I got into this group because of that.
Good investment.
Yeah, so it's just like, yeah, I heard like nothing from him for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden he's just like, hey, you want to come play? And it's just like, yeah, sure. So and then yeah, this has definitely been one of my most favorite groups, if not the favorite group that I've ever had. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I remember Nyessa. Well, should we talk about how we met? Like, actually met?
Sure.
Because that's such a great story. Go ahead, you can.
So from my end of things, so I have this YouTube channel that I haven't posted anything to in a year. Sorry, but
You gonna shout it out, or are you just gonna leave that there?
well, it's okay. It's fine. It's NyessaGaming on YouTube. It's where I have, I guess you could say it's on break, a role-playing Skyrim series called A Bard Song. And Swan was one of my first regular commenters, and I always loved her comments. They were always really thoughtful and interesting and not generic, like a lot of comments tend to be. And when I joined Tumblr, because I thought this would be a way that I could keep people up to date on what I was doing, she added me, she followed me, and I went and looked at her blog and was like, well, she seems pretty cool, so I'm going to go ahead and add her back.
Had her fooled.
No, you have definitely fulfilled expectations.
Oh.
Aww.
And then some.
Y'all. Yeah, I was actually, I was installing mods for Skyrim and I wanted to check out the Become a Bard mod. So I Googled it to see like what songs were there. And one of the things that popped up was Nyessa series. And I was like, a roleplay series, a Let's Roleplay series. What is that? And so I like started watching and it was great. And then, yeah, Tumblr, and we started talking and watching Critical Role together. And so I don't remember even why it came up, but I sent Klaus the link to her series. And when he was building this game, he went, do you think that she'd want to play with it? Because she's a great role player. And so I was like, I can ask. So he had me ask her and invite her in, and I think we have a good group. And then George has been around. I've actually known George, I think, about a year, about half as long as I've known everyone else. Because while we were still playing the game I was in with Katie, Klaus was also running the first Norithil game. It was when Norithil was like his new setting that he had been working on, and he didn't have the Pantheon set yet and everything. But George had been the only player who was there from the get-go. And Klaus is like, hey, I need another player because people keep leaving, and I don't want to, only be running for 2 people, basically. So I was like, yeah, I'll join that. And so that's how I met George. And then Klaus really wanted him for this game as well. And it took him a little bit to be able to be available for it. But yeah, that's kind of how he came into the main group.
Cool. Yeah, because George wasn't able to be with us until like session 4 after the prologue kind of deal. Mm-hmm. Because he was just really, really busy. Like we started the prologue in like the first week of September of 2017, I think. Something like that.
I think it was a little later than that. Because we had that one shot that became a 2-shot first.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We started playing together as a group the first couple weeks of September. And then we started the prologue after that. That's right.
I think it was like the beginning of October.
Yeah, when we finally started the prologue.
Yeah, that sounds right.
But yeah, we started as a group in like early September. And then George was going to be a part of it. We knew basically from the very beginning, but we heard nothing from him until like January. And then finally he's just like, yes, guys, I exist. I'm coming. I'll be there like in like maybe 3 sessions. Yeah.
He runs on Tuesdays. He runs for me, Klaus, Roger, and Michael. We have a game set in Tal'Dorei, and he DMs that. So he has a hard time finding time to, do multiple games.
Yeah.
It was stuck for him doing the last Norithil game, and then he came into the Tuesday group for some one-shots and side story things. So we were making a switch. And
well, I'm glad that he can come in. I don't really know him that well, but he seems like a really cool person, and he's a very fun player. So
he's great to like roleplay off of.
Yeah.
I can't wait till George hears all this.
I know, right?
It's just going to be like an hour and a half of us just gushing about each other.
Let's just talk about
pretty much.
I mean, that's basically what it is going to be, because as much as this group likes to take the piss out of each other, we're all like,
we love each other.
We do.
Group hug.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the next question then?
Yeah.
All right. So question number 3. Who is your favorite PC that you ever played?
I'm going to go last.
Okay. I can go first with that one because I already know my answer to that one.
Right.
So I had trouble picking. I had trouble picking in the first place because all my characters are my favorite characters. I don't play a character that I'm not going to enjoy playing. I'm very strong on that. But my two favorite characters, one is my favorite one that I concepted. I wasn't really able to play it because the group fell apart. And, well, actually, I can say that about both of them. They were both wizards. One of them was in the Pathfinder campaign. Well, it wasn't the campaign setting, but using Pathfinder rules. She was a fetchling transmutation wizard. And for those of you who don't know what a fetchling is, it's kind of like a genasi, except it's the shadow plane instead of the elemental plane. And the thing with fetchlings is that they're really, really thin, really gaunt. They have no pupils. They have glowing, emissive eyes, usually like a pale green kind of thing. And their entire body is grayscale, including their hair, their skin, and everything like that. The only thing that's colorful is their eyes, and it's usually like a pale green kind of thing, or pale yellow. And her name was Cecilia Brillishard, and she was born on the plane of shadow, and as fetchlings normally do, she was a kind of like a delivery person in between the shadow plane and the material plane, trading goods between both of the planes, because like wizards on the material plane need materials from the shadow plane, and the shadow plane needs materials from the material plane for whatever reason. And she ended up really loving the material plane because basically of color. She loved the concept of color, and she started to have a favorite color. Her favorite color was like a deep royal blue. And she fell so much in love with the material plane that she ended up dyeing her hair so that to this royal blue. And you couldn't tell on the shadow plane because color doesn't really exist there. However, her erratic, irrational overlord found out and banished her from the shadow plane and to the material plane. And her parents also got punished because of that, and she doesn't really know too much about it because she got exiled. When she got to the material plane, she took on the trait name Gloom, and that's how she referred to herself all the time. And then she got a Raven familiar, and so she's one of my favorite characters that I concepted based on all of that. She would have been a great roleplay character to talk about all that kind of stuff. Could have been like a shadow plane arc, that kind of thing. It'd be cool. The other one that I really liked, I think, was also transmutation. Well, she was going to be a transmutation wizard. And she was in 5e. And her name was Rosa-Lynn Spellscribe. And she was based off of a character portrait that I had found of a woman in her 40s, probably early 50s, long dark black hair and goggles, like wooden runes around on a necklace, mage robes, and that kind of thing. And I saw that portrait, and the second I saw that portrait, this character concept flooded into my brain. Of a woman whose husband had died like 10, 15 years before. She had to raise her kids on her own. Eventually her kids grew up, moved out, got their own lives, and with nothing to do because her husband was dead, her kids had moved out, she decided to go to wizard school. And so she became a wizard later in life and decided to go adventuring to find something to do, to research more about the world, and maybe find a way to be able to just hear the voice of her husband again. those two were my favorite characters. I haven't been able to play them very much because sadly the groups that I made them for dissolved. But I would love, and I don't generally play the same character twice, but I would bring those characters back if either one of those characters back if I had the opportunity to play them in a group again. So those are my favorite characters.
All right. They both sound pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a role player. That's all I can really say.
I don't know. I'm not sure you really fit in with this group.
Oh.
Yeah, we're just so not into the roleplay side of things.
You're just a big bunch of murder hobos.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, who wants to talk next?
I'll go next. It's
Katie's sitting there shaking her head like, no.
I'll rescue you.
Thank you.
Even though I generally hate questions that ask for your favorite anything, because I have such a hard time picking favorites. I love all of my children, but I'm gonna have to go with my very first D&D character, Angharad Leatherfoot, more commonly known as Harry. And she...
You have to pronounce it very particularly or she will hit you.
Yes.
We have learned this the hard way.
It's not Harry, it's Harry.
Harry.
Harry
Like you're saying
Potter.
hat.
It's very important. And she is a dwarven cleric of Desna. We played in 5e, but we were originally talking about playing in Pathfinder, and I basically built the character concept around her being a follower of Desna, so we just pulled Desna into the world and used the 5e rules. So she is a very young dwarf who grew up in this big, extended merchant family, and she was kind of the black sheep of the family. Her parents blamed that on her being best friends with a gnome, which certainly was an influence on her. But they always thought she was, kind of flighty. And eventually, Harry ended up, she wasn't really very religious growing up. She would kind of show reverence to her family's deities. And she knew a little bit about Desna from her best friend, who was a follower of Desna. But she wasn't terribly devout herself until one day her family fell into debt, and she decided that the best way she could deal with this was to go and gamble to make enough money to pay off her family's debt. So she called upon the goddess of luck to help her. She was able to do it, and then she went to her parents and was like, okay, I'm going to go be a cleric of Desna now. Bye! They don't understand, but they gave their blessing, and so she set off, found this random priest of Desna wandering along the roads, and was like, hey, you're going to teach me. And that's how her adventure started.
The impulse control in that party, collectively, was in the negative.
Yeah.
Just 3 disasters.
That was funny because it just sounded like the story of an adventurer in a sense, just like, hey, I'm gonna go do this now, bye.
Right?
Yep.
It's like, why are you a cleric of Desna anyways? It's like, because I wanted to. It's like, okay.
Pretty much.
I'm just thinking about it. I'm actually gonna send you guys the picture of Rosa-Lynn.
Oh, snap.
Wow.
Like, you can see what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
right? You just see that picture and you're like, I have to play that.
Yes.
So when we upload this, I'll upload that on Imager or something and link it in the show notes.
Cool.
Oh, by the way, if you want to see what Harry looks like, I have a portrait of her that was painted by Needlessly Cryptic on Tumblr. And if you go to, Well, we'll put up a link to it. I think that would be easier than me trying to say how to find it.
Yeah.
We'll timestamp it and we'll link it.
Yeah, we'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But you can see what my favorite daughter looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Katie, your turn.
Neither of you want to go.
I'll go. I just don't want to take up a shit ton of time, so I'll let Katie go.
I don't have a favorite. I don't want to be a cop-out.
All right, so other than Melly, what's the first one that pops into your head that you remember?
There's two that I was playing just before I traveled. One is a very good character, and one is an asshole. So it's fun playing both of them because it's very different each time. Because one's like an ASMR cleric of Helm, so she's really good and all about saving people and, you know, all that shit. And then the other one's kind of just into doing whatever she feels like. She'll shank someone if she has to, and she lies a lot. So that's really fun.
Cool.
So.
Although I could never picture Katie playing an asshole.
Well, I have people say that to me, which is why I was specifically, when I made the new character, I was like, right, this time I'm being a dick.
I definitely hear you, because like I tend to play good characters too, but in my massive bank of character concepts that I have never been able to play, I have a neutral evil rogue that's specifically built around I'm going to betray somebody and literally stab them in the back.
Nice.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's like, yeah.
I would comment on this, but that gets into one of our later questions, so I'll hold on to that for now.
Okay. All right, Swan, yours.
Oh, God. Well, I also love all of my daughters very much, so it's very hard for me to choose. I'm loving Vesper a lot, and I really love my gunslinger who I play. I'm really torn between my gunslinger, who I'm playing for George's game right now, and my last Norithil character, Ravenwick. I think those are my two favorites so far. Faust, my gunslinger. Just the name. I just love her name too, Faust Fortunato. She is grew up in the Clasp in Western. As she grew up, some things happened where she was like, I don't think I really want to stick with the organization anymore. So she was like, I'm going to start doing my own business as like a courier and a smuggler. So she left Western just before the Chroma Conclave hit. And it's been about a year now, and she hasn't gone back yet. So she doesn't know if any of her family's alive. But during the time she was out working as a smuggler, she was given this package that she had to give to somebody. And she brought it to him. So he had her go and pick up this package for him, and it's given to her by this woman with one hand, very odd woman. She brought it back to him. He opened it up, and it was a gun. And he promptly shot himself in the foot, dropped the gun, broke it, and was like, take it back to that bitch. I don't want it. And so Faust had always been like a tinkerer growing up. She kind of lived near where like the gnomes were in Western and everything, and grew up tinkering. And so she fixed the gun, and she also fixed a design flaw that had been in place since it was originally built. Gave it back to the woman, Ripley, who was like, you know what, why don't you hang on to this since you fixed it so well. So she's been studying that and trying to figure out what it is, how it works, how to build more. And it's interesting because she's technically chaotic neutral, but she's got a heart somewhere in there. And she's very driven by her own curiosity. And she's a lot of fun to play because while she's very concerned with like making sure people like her and being, presenting herself very well to whoever she's talking to, she's also very driven by her own goals, and it's just and she's kind of carefree and just has a really cool attitude that I like exploring. And then Ravenwick was my character in Klaus's former game for Norithil, and I usually, this goes into another later question, but when I build characters, I usually build them like utility. I'm focused more on like the role play and like what I can do outside of combat. And Ravenwick was the first character I built that was a combat character. She was so cool. She was a quarter elf blood hunter who grew up on the distant continent of Severwind in a little town called Ashmire until she was orphaned because a vampire killed her family. And her whole backstory is hilariously grimdark. She was made to the point of being like so edgy it was kind of funny. She was like almost a parody of like of that kind of character. Like
Warhammer territory of grimdark.
Oh yeah, like fucking like the darkest, Batman kind of like. Yeah. She was like totally like almost like a Batman type parody. In fact, I stored her dice in like a Batman like cookie jar that I had.
Yeah.
But yeah, so her parents were murdered by a vampire, and she watched it happen, and went to this orphanage in a bigger town. And Klaus asked me what that town was called, and I refreshed fantasy name generators and called it Embershore. She grew up in the orphanage there. And then when she aged out of it, joined the Unhallowed of Wicked Hill. And
so we basically have you to blame for the
everything.
Setting that we're starting out in.
Yes. No, because I came up with Embershore. Like I said, fantasy name generators. Great site. And then Klaus actually came up with the Unhallowed, the Wicked Hill, the Tower Basalt, and everything for me. But Ravenwick, then it was her last name was Ravenwick, and she dropped her first name because it was atrocious and very elven. So she started looking for this vampire that had killed her family, and she was hunting with some of the other Unhallowed, and they took her to the Feywild to hunt down this thing that she later came to know as the Elder Fey. And it slaughtered her whole hunting party, and the only reason she survived is because she got a lucky shot and killed it. And as she's standing there, covered in blood, trying to process what had just happened, she hears this slow clapping and turns and meets this archfey of the Winter Court named Mariana. And they struck a deal, and Mary took Ravenwick's heart, both literally and figuratively. So Ravenwick could not experience emotion. She could kind of like acknowledge that she had like an inkling of a feeling, but it was never enough to like properly acknowledge it and like influence her decisions. And so after this, she kind of realized she didn't really recognize herself anymore, went off hunting on her own to find this vampire, ran into the party that had been playing in that campaign, and met George's character Rex, who knew the vampire that had killed her family because he had married into this prominent family that had also fucked with Rex's family. And so they're like, well, we have a common enemy. Let's go take care of it. And then everything else happened in that campaign, and she stuck around with them. At the end of it, she and Rex ended up getting married.
Yeah, they did.
She got her heart back, obviously, and left Mary's employ, and possibly left the Feywild worse for wear. I don't know.
Maybe we'll find out.
Maybe we'll find out. I don't want to say too much about what we did in that game because there's possible consequences that we're going to have to deal with later. But she was one of my favorites because, again, she was a great combat character, and as a very emotional person, it was really fun to kind of play this deadpan character. And there are personal reasons that she meant a lot to me. Like tapping into that, not feeling any emotion, kind of tapped into, depression feels and things like that, because that's the closest I've ever come to feeling gray and emotionless. And so, she meant a lot to me, and she was just really fun to play.
Well, Ravenwick is my favorite of your characters.
Oh, thank you. Mm-hmm. I also liked Rune, but I'm not going to get into her thing because that's going to be another like half hour of, well, here's her family history. She had way too long of a backstory because I came into D&D as a writer and not as a player.
Oh boy.
So it was sort of like, well, I have to obviously know everything about this character. No, you can just kind of have a rough sketch. It's fine.
Yeah. Rune was so good though.
Rune is fun. She also was a mess, and I liked her a lot. I don't think I'd play her again.
As a DM, I encourage point form backstories.
Yeah.
Heavily encourage.
Yeah.
That does kind of lead into our next question, though, which is, do you have a process you follow when you create a character, and what is it?
I think Katie should go first.
I mean, my process is the worst. Because I pick a class, and then I pick a race that I think will be good for that class, and then I make the character like 5 minutes before I'm going to play.
You're
Perfect.
that person.
I am that person. I'm the worst.
So we have the two ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't really have a process exactly because it depends on what comes to me first, but I usually just start with some random image popping into my head of a character in the middle of action, and usually just from there I think, okay, I can tell what the character's attitude is, I can tell something about what kind of abilities they have, and I just kind of build from there.
Yeah, mine's kind of related to that. I generally start with a character concept. Let me actually get my bank of planned characters here. They don't come with backstories for the most part, but backstory is usually pretty easy to build from the abilities and the class choices in the race. So I don't worry about that too much. So for example, this one that I have here is a so I start with a character concept, and I'm like, okay, what do I want them to do? What do I want them to be a part of? That kind of thing. And so for this character that I brought up, it's in the Pathfinder system. It's 3 levels in Fighter, 7 levels in Investigator, which is a hybrid class between Alchemist and Rogue, and then 10 levels in the Liberator Prestige class. The entire idea behind this character is that they use a weighted spear, which is a spear with a mace on the other end, and 2-weapon fight with a double weapon. They have improved Sunder, applied engineering, so they can like break open cages and things like that. Disable device, a couple of rogue talents for like picking locks and things. Basically, the entire idea is to sneak in somewhere, free a bunch of like slaves and stuff like that, and, you know, fight your way back out. And so I start with that character concept. I think about what do I want to do, and then I think about all the different class features that I'll need in order to make that character concept. And then from there, I usually pick, okay, so is this person going to be male, female, or whatever? What race are they going to be? After that, I choose all the other stuff. So basically, I start with class, concept, class, and then everything else that'll go into that, usually.
Yeah, I'm similar. I either start with the class that I want to play, or usually actually what I start with is like a personality.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be like, you know what, I kind of want to play somebody who's, we'll take, this will lead into another question, of course, but we'll take Vesper. Originally, I had made Vesper for Pathfinder as a rogue, but I had just gotten to finish playing a character that had been a part of a TPK in that Pathfinder setting, who had been very soft and gentle and like very kind and hardworking. So my original concept for the original version of Vesper was very much based off of the Taco twins from Adventure Zone, Loop and Taco. And the idea of this character who just like didn't give a shit, basically, and was really like kind of lazy and was like willing to risk getting in trouble, basically. And so then I went from that and I went, okay, I also want to play like a field medic type character. So from there, I usually, I start with the personality and then I go, okay, what class works best for this? And then what race works best with this? And then I go into like their name and maybe how they became that class. I usually like to think of like who they are when the story begins. And the way I do backstory is like, how did they get there? Which is why mine can tend to be kind of long-winded. And I try to pare it down. Like with Faust, I had just had it, like the whole thing of like, she went to Ripley and this is how she got the gun and this is what she's doing. And then George gave us his backstory questionnaire and I'm like, I guess she has family now. So it started very simple with her and then became more complicated. But I always try to think like, who are they in the moment? And then how to build it there. And then I go, how did they get here? And that can also influence features I take and bits of the personality, things that they're afraid of, things that they want, whether they know it or not.
Two very important questions for any character.
Yeah. And especially it's good to know like what your character wants that they don't know that they want is really interesting. Like if you asked Faust what she wanted, she would say revenge. But if you asked me what she wanted, I would say she wants to be happy. And it's a very different, it's just interesting to look at like the nuances of character personalities and things that they realize about themselves that maybe you don't realize, and vice versa. It's always interesting.
So I think we might skip the next question because the question after that ties in really well to what we were just discussing. And now getting into our characters for this first Back to the Story campaign, what is the inspiration behind your character? We've already heard from Swan about where Vesper comes from.
All right, I guess I can do mine. Because Katie's probably going to be, I planned her like 10 minutes before the game started.
I planned her the day before, actually.
Oh, the day before.
Oh,
all
wow.
Right.
Really getting ahead of things there.
Planning ahead.
For Amson, it's actually kind of interesting because like I've played for this'll date me a little bit. I've been playing for like about 10 and like a decade and a half kind of deal. Since that was when I got started to D&D, like 13 years kind of deal. But in all of that time, I've never played a bard. And I played fighters, I played druids, I played rangers, and then in second edition, I played innumerable multi-classes of like everything. Like fighter mage thief, fighter thief, cleric ranger, all that kind of good stuff. But I never played a bard in that entire time. And it was like, it's weird because in all of the editions of bard is always that kind of good at everything kind of class, kind of like a hybrid of everything. Like, yeah, they can do stuff in combat. Yeah, they can do stuff in like exploration. They got some thief stuff. They got some magic, and I'm kind of a generalist player in general as well. I don't like to play specialist characters. I like characters that are useful no matter what, right? And so my inspiration for Amson was, it's high time I finally play a bard. So 5th edition, it was a 5th edition game, and I honestly think that 5th edition is the best rendition of the bard ever in D&D. So I'm like, you know what? It's 5th edition. Bards are great in 5th edition. I gotta play a bard finally. So I'm playing a bard, and it's one of the most favorite characters that I've ever played. So
I guess I'll go next. Ellery started with kind of that same flash of an image in my head, and in her case, I saw her in kind of a dark alley, leaning up against the wall, fiddling with a dagger, and looking menacing. When I started creating her character, all I knew is that I wanted her to be very angry. Because I haven't played very many angry characters, and I like to kind of experiment with different kinds of personalities from my own. So the way she handles anger is pretty much the exact opposite of how I do. She is she takes any other negative emotion and turns it into anger, whereas I take anger and turn it into something else. So I was thinking about her, and I was thinking, well, she would make sense as a rogue the way I'm imagining her. But then it occurred to me, what would piss off a character who likes to lurk in the shadows more than anything else? And the answer to that was wild magic. So that is what set her on the course that she's on now. And then in addition to that, I just really liked the idea of putting together a kind of non-traditional family. And I like the idea of, in a fantasy world, what happens when a member of one race, a member of one species, is raised by a different one. So half-elf raised by half-orcs leads to some really interesting dynamics and really interesting sort of questions of identity that I'm hoping to get into as we go along.
Yeah. So that's how Vesper started, as I was saying, with the Pathfinder. And then when we moved into this campaign, and we kind of wanted to do like a holy roller type thing, I was like, well, I'll go cleric, I guess. And I was like, okay, well, why is she a cleric? And I also wanted her to still have that field medic type thing. So I was like, well, maybe her parents, one of them is involved in the church and one of them is an alchemist. So the alchemist would be like the hands-on healing and learning about, herbs and practical medical first aid. And I almost went with paladin, actually, when we first started playing, until Ball decided that, it was going to be a paladin. Because I like the lay on hands ability. Because I like the idea of Vesper being the one who will rush into the battle, shove your guts back in, stitch you up, and then dash off to the next person who needs help. And as we go, I'm probably going to be able to get more into that with different feats and things like that. The more of the hands-on type. But I also wanted to be like the healer. So I was like, well, a cleric would be a better choice for that anyways. And I can build her more of like a finesse type cleric and just possibly lean into rogue later. But I wanted her to be like that field medic, that healer type. And so that was kind of the inspiration of like, who is this healer? And so that's why her personality is varied from Loop and Taco to what it is now, which is still a little bit cold and she's still kind of aloof and self-absorbed, but she's more compassionate now because the healing aspect sort of took center stage, and the religion aspect kind of came up just of it naturally sort of flowed that way. But yeah, I intended her to have two dads back from Pathfinder, and then when I was doing this, I wanted her to be a Genasi instead of a human. And so I was like, well, why is she? Well, how did that happen? Back to the process thing of why is this who she is? And I ended up with like, well, her mother was also a Genasi, but died. And so she never really knew her. And so you mentioned questions of identity. And I think Vesper has a lot of those that she pretends she doesn't have. She likes to come across as really self-assured and is not as sure of herself as she likes to pretend to be for a lot of reasons.
Inspiration from Melly was literally just, I knew I wanted to play her with it. I didn't really know what I was going to do with her at first. I didn't want her to be too, involved with I wanted her to be able to do stuff with everyone, but wasn't able to stay as long. I didn't want her to too much at the front. So that's why I made her a little bit quieter, and so then she has the excuse to hide in the library if she's not around thing. But yeah, I didn't really have full grasp of what I was doing with her until I started playing. So that's usually how I do it.
We'd love to see more of Melly, though.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to now that I'm on a normal time scale with you guys.
Yay for being on the same continent.
Yeah.
All right. So if everybody wants to take a 5-10 minute break or something like that, we will be back, and we'll be asking each other a few more questions about our characters. And then we have some very, very specific questions from a couple of listeners as well. So we will be right back.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Back to the Story. For notifications when an episode goes live, you can subscribe to us on podcasts.com or follow us on Twitter at back2_the_story. Or, if you would like further information about the campaign, the player characters, NPCs, or behind-the-scenes sneak peeks, follow us on Tumblr at back-to-the-story.tumblr.com.